welcome. You're here to rest now, to settle in beneath your blankets. Let the hum of the day fade behind you, and ease your mind into a slower rhythm. Tonight, we're going back in time, not to castles and coronations, but to something much humbler and far more visceral. Behind the thick stone walls of bustling medieval towns, past the church bells and open markets, another world hummed just out of view, a world that few spoke of in polite company, yet one that touched every table, every bowl of stew, and every passing cart. And the scent of salt, iron, and smoke clung to the air long after sunset. It was a necessary labor, brutal, repetitive, and strangely ritualistic. This is the world of the medieval slaughterhouse. It was hidden in plain sight, wedged near the river edge, or outside the town gate where the gutters ran red at dawn. And though you may think yourself strong or prepared, surviving even a single day in this world, this medieval meat-making machine might be harder than you'd imagine. Tonight's journey will unfold slowly, like the opening of a heavy wooden door on rusted hinges. Imagine the clang of iron, the hush of early footsteps, and the rising curl of chimney smoke. But from repetition without end, you have a job in the slaughterhouse. Not a prestigious one, not even a secure one, but it's work. And in the town of Rouen, or York, or Krakow, that means everything. First, we'll walk through a day in the life of a slaughterhouse, labor of feel, the weight of tools in hand, and the sting of salt in every cut. You pass the apothecary. Salt is used liberally both to preserve meat and to cleanse wounds. It seeps into your cracked skin like fire. The brine barrels sit in the corner, massive wooden casks filled with coarse salt and gray water, used to preserve or clean. This is called fleshing, and the tool used is shaped like a crescent moon. The motion is rhythmic, hypnotic, almost. Back and forth, back and forth. Hours pass. You plunge your arms in them again and again. Your cuts sting, but the real pain is slow. The cold, the rot, the knowledge that your hands may never fully heal, shuttered tight. They know. Let the scrape of the knife and the thud of the axe fade into soft echoes. The sun has set on the slaughterhouse, and in the stillness you may notice how quiet the town becomes. You can see it in their eyes. Your boots squish, the tools are cleaned barely. The waste is hauled away, usually to the river. Some say it pollutes the water. Others say the fish like it. No one asks the fish. Still, his family has been in the guild for 3 generations. His apron may be stained, but his voice carries weight, politically, economically, socially. Below those steep slate tiles, a powerful group stirs not, kings or bishops, but butchers. Not for battle exactly, but for control, for presence. A butcher in uniform was a symbol, one that told the town, order is kept here. Food flows because we allow it to. And Jean, with his silver-inlaid cleaver and his sealed ledger book, is part of its spine. Rumors whispered in candlelit taverns suggested that some debts owed to the guild were never paid in coin, that sometimes justice disappeared in the smokehouse, still scraping, still pulling, still trying to keep pace. They regulated prices, set rules for quality. Some even dined with magistrates, their guild seal, often bearing a cleaver crossed over a bleeding hart or horned ox, was stamped on official orders. Paris was restless. The 100 Years' War loomed like a storm. Famine knocked at the gates. The King Zhang II had been captured at Poitiers. The city trembled. Together they orchestrated protests, demanded reforms, even stormed the royal palace in 1358. Armed butchers led the charge, decided who could sell and who could not. They hired inspectors, enforced codes, built slaughterhouses close to rivers, but not so close as to offend cathedral-goers. He was murdered that same year, struck down by a fellow patriot, fearful of tyranny in new clothing. But the butchers lingered, dull in places, and begin the long, practiced slice down the belly. You've done this hundreds of times. Still, your hands slip. The heat of the body and the cold of the morning air form a kind of fog, both literal and mental. And in smaller towns across Europe, from Ghent to Prague to London, similar guilds held sway. Less flamboyant, perhaps, but no less entrenched. You hold the ropes. Who knew the weight of flesh and the price of silence? You steady the flank. They were the shadow infrastructure of medieval licensing, but vital. You gut, you pull, planning, negotiating, watching the city shift beneath his feet. There were tales, not written in ledgers or carved above doorways, but passed softly around hearths, whispered in taverns, and murmured by washerwomen rinsing cloth in rivers that ran cloudy with blood. All while flies gather of strange happenings that clung to butchers like fat to skin. Even in winter, cobblestone lanes that echo beneath cartwheels, the sour tang of rendered fat drifting through the morning air. At the edge of town sits the Schlachthaus, the slaughterhouse, its walls blackened from years of boiling and burning. Rather, it was a mood, a sense, a thread of unease that wove through generations. They come as if summoned, a lingering spiritual burden from taking life again and again every day, without ceremony, without prayer, a transgression not against law but against nature. When his apprentice loses a hand to an unsteady cleaver, the whispers start again. There were places where butchers could not hold public office, where their shops had to sit beyond the town's sacred boundaries. In parts of Bohemia, local legends spoke of a grease ghost, a figure cloaked in suet and steam who cursed the hands of greedy meatmen, leaving them unable to feel warmth again. All this, despite their importance, the air in the butcher's yard is heavy. Even the priest avoids his door. Where the slaughterhouses clustered, illness lingered. Some thought it divine punishment, others blamed the curse. And the smell it changes as the day goes on, from sharp to sour, to something almost sweet by midday. The curse, you might say, was not just about ghosts or omens, but about guilt, projection, and the smell that never washed off. It's not one smell. The offal from slaughterhouses, blood, bile, bits of flesh, was often poured into the nearest stream or gutter. In summer, the stench could be overwhelming. In winter, it froze into strange, grisly sheets. Old stories about ghostly figures spotted near abandoned abattoirs. Let the mist fall over them, gentle and undisturbed. About dreams of red rivers, about animals who watch too closely. But his eyes, people say, are dimmer than they once were, as though something clings to him. They were well fed, yet records show many did not live long. A display of wealth, of dominion, of decadence, golden platters, roast boars, and the strange rituals of medieval meat-eating. Joint pain, stomach troubles, lingering infections. Some chalked it up to the toll of the work, others to the butcher's curse. Others recited private prayers before every kill. A few took pilgrimages, paid alms, or even retired early, passing their cleavers to younger, more hopeful hands. Neither do cats, despite the scraps. The animals seem to know its layers. You listen for the thick, that without repentance true, deep repentance it would be weighed down in the afterlife, sinking like iron in dark water. Wet sound of success. In many parts of Europe, butchers occupied a strange space, not quite outcasts, but never fully embraced. Their work fed the people, but also reminded them of death, and then, not just physical power, but spiritual weight. It was life, and sin, and sacrifice, all at once. And to work in its every day was to risk absorbing something unwanted. Quickly, you work. Some panic, some go limp, others resist. You coax them forward with murmured words, though it does nothing. They've heard it all before. Then the baker, already warming his ovens. You know the butcher's district by sound before you see it, the low grunts of penned animals, the rhythmic thud of axe on wood, the wet squelch of waste being shoveled aside. Then we'll explore the rise of meat guilds, their unexpected power in places like Paris, and the odd blend of prestige and fear they inspired. It no longer smells of wool or skin oils, but something sharper, metallic. The fabric scratches your skin where it hasn't softened with sweat. From there we'll trace the strange rumors and whispered curses surrounding butchers across Europe. And finally, we'll end with a look at the lives of the elite, those who never touched a cleaver but dined on feasts laced with symbolism and social theater. Now, close your eyes if you like, or let them wander. Imagine a cobbled alleyway, slick with mist and morning chill. This is where we begin. Imagine yourself in a tunic, stiff with last week's labor. You awaken before the sun rises in a shared room above the tannery. Your joints ache, not from age. The street is still quiet as you walk. Cobblestones are slick from night rains, and the gutters carry the faint scent of runoff and ash. Your fingers are already raw, calloused not just by blade but by brine. Your first task, move the animals into the pens. Then comes the first cut of the day. You are not the one to make it. That honor goes to the master butcher or his eldest apprentice. There is no pause between life and labor. The animal is hoisted limbs, bound and pulled upward by a creaking wooden winch. Gravity helps with the next part. You take your curved knife bone handled. You scrape. By afternoon, the salt water burns more than the knife ever did. Sometimes you clean the hides, stretching them on wooden frames, scraping off the last of the fat and sinew. Lunch is bread and broth, eaten standing. The smell of the place clings to your food. You eat quickly. Talking is rare. By evening, your clothes are heavy, your arms ache, your back stiffens, and you sleep like a dropped sack of grain, utterly still. But even in sleep, your fingers twitch. This is just one day. There will be another tomorrow, and the next, and the next. But for now, rest easy. Soon we'll lift our gaze from the laborers to the men who gave orders, who wore guild badges and carried knives, not only for flesh, but for power. The sun rises again, quietly gilding the rooftops of old Paris in the early 14th century. They are known as les bouchers noirs, the black butchers, a name that echoes through centuries with both reverence and suspicion. Now, let's drift into their world. Not the cold stone floors of a slaughterhouse, but the polished wooden halls of a meat guild meeting somewhere near the Rue de la Ferronnerie, where the stink of blood and tallow never quite leaves the cobbles. Imagine a man named Jean, not a peasant nor a noble, but a butcher's son turned master. The guild is not merely a union of tradesmen. It is an institution, a government within the government. The black butchers, were more than meatmen. In 13th and 14th century Paris, they controlled vast portions of the food supply: oxen, sheep, pigs, poultry. They even paid for their own militia, kind of private enforcement group, made up of apprentices and journeymen. At their peak, the butchers had influence in the Privat de Paris, the city's civic administration. But power, as always, comes with shadows. You see, the butchers were feared, not just respected. Their trade was messy, and their methods persuasive. Whether these tales were true or born of resentment, they fed a growing unease. And then came Etienne Marcel. Etienne was the provost of Paris in the mid-14th century, a man of reform, ambition, and dangerous timing. In this vacuum of power, the butchers rose. Marcel allied himself with them early on. He saw in them a kind of populist strengthman of the people, with tools in hand and muscle in numbers. Imagine their cleavers glinting, not with meat fat, but with torchlight. Marcel's revolution was short-lived. Their reputation had changed, from tradesmen to kingmakers, and the city watched them more closely now. Over the next century, their privileges were slowly chipped away. Regulations tightened, their private militia dissolved, their meetings restricted. The state was reasserting itself. Still, the guild did not vanish. It persisted, smaller, quieter, like a coal banked under ash. These were men who handled death daily, who carved life into cuts and quarters. Their biographies were rarely written, their names easily lost, but their influence is etched into the bones of every old market square and butcher's lane. So next time you picture medieval power, don't just imagine kings and castles. Imagine Jean, the guild master, with hands that smell of lard and ledger ink, sitting in a quiet room above the slaughterhouse. Let that image settle now, gently. And as we move forward, let us turn to something even murkier, something half seen through the smoke of folklore and fear. There were whispers, you see, whispers of curses. In the next chapter of our journey, we'll explore these quiet superstitions, the legends of the butcher's curse. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts wander gently now into older, more uncertain ground. Beyond the guild halls and the orderly structure of medieval civic life, they called it la du boucher, the butcher's curse. No single story defines it. It was not a doctrine, nor a formal superstition. Butchers, some believed, were marked, not only by their trade, but by something darker. Imagine a small town in the Rhineland, perhaps sometime in the late 1200s. The children don't linger there. Inside, the butcher works. He's skilled. His knives are sharp, his hands steady. When his eldest son falls ill, not with plague, but something slower, wasting some in the village nod to one another. These quiet judgments weren't just cruelty. They were part of an older understanding. You see, in the medieval imagination, blood had power. Some towns forbade butchers from testifying in court. Others denied them burial within consecrated ground. In southern Italy, folk tales told of night shadows that trailed butchers home after work spirits of animals wronged or prayers left unsaid. It was superstition, yes, but also a kind of social tension wrapped in myth. And then there was the question of health. Medieval sanitation was ... primitive. Disease followed, typhoid, dysentery, and worse. And while people didn't yet understand germs, they noticed patterns. But the real mystery, the one that troubled even the most rational minds, was this: why did butchers themselves so often fall ill? They were strong. In Paris, certain clergy whispered that the soul of a butcher dimmed each time he raised the blade. And so, some butchers began to wear small tokens, amulets, rings etched with protective psalms. Whether or not the curse was real, its presence was felt. And even today, in some rural corners of Europe, there are stories. But let's leave those shadows now. We return now to warmth, to splendor, to the halls of the elite, where meat was not a burden or a curse, but a triumph. In the final segment, we step into the feasting chambers of nobles. Now drift gently with me from the clamor of the commons to the hush of stone halls and tapestried chambers. The air changes here, not thick with brine or soot, but perfumed with herbs, beeswax, and the soft aroma of roasting meats. This is the other side of medieval life. Above the labor of the slaughterhouse, far from the blood-slicked floors and weary backs, the nobility dined in rituals of grandeur. Here, meat wasn't merely sustenance, it was spectacle, a symbol. The hunt has just returned. Outside, servants drag antlered stags across gravel, the creature's dark eyes now glazed in stillness. But inside, inside, heat crackles in a massive hearth, casting warm light onto oak beams high above. The silverware hasn't reached your end of the table. You'll be eating with fingers and torn bread, but the aroma drifts down just the same. Rich, earthy, thick with rosemary and sage. A display of status carved with silver knives and laid out on embroidered linens. To serve it whole at a banquet was to tell a silent story of conquest. The boar's tusks gleamed like trophies on the table. Pigeons and quails might be baked into intricate pies. The crusts of these pies weren't meant to be eaten. They served as vessels, shaped with seals and stamped with decorative patterns, more like edible sculptures than food. Sometimes, a small flag bearing the host's family crest would be placed between them. Spices imported at great cost were used liberally: cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and black pepper. A noble's generosity was measured by the abundance and diversity of meats presented. For the animal had still died. The meat had still been cleaned, salted, and shaped by unseen hands. The nobles, in all their glory, still depended on the very work that they themselves would never perform. A feast might feature several courses each, with its own selection of dishes, dozens of animals consumed in a single evening. Not only did they add flavor, but they signaled the wealth required to obtain them. A peasant caught with venison risked not just a fine, but dismemberment. Huge iron spits rotated by hand over roaring flames. Let the fire grow dim. We return slowly to ourselves. Barrels of brine were opened. In the hall, the only sound was laughter, goblets clinking, and the rustle of silk sleeves. Knives flashed in motion, perfumed, hidden beneath sauces and garnishes. There was no curse here. To the high tables of the privileged, where meat became theater and status, far removed from the hands that carved it. No blood beneath the fingernails, only pleasure. Let the music soften, even indoors, about roles, about the unseen effort behind every bite, and the strange dance between those who prepared and those who consumed. And every aspect of the feast was layered with meaning, like a reminder of their dominion over life and land alike. Golden and slick with spiced glaze, rests in a bed of apples. But here, in this way, the meal was an assertion of power, of one's place in the order of things. A suckling pig, the way life moved in circles, work and feast, silence and song, pain and pleasure. Thick slices of venison steam beside bowls of honeyed parsnips and stewed cherries. The animal on their plate was no longer recognizable as an animal. It had been transformed, gilded. Each soul moved through their days with routines shaped by food, by tradition. The sounds of knives and cleavers are far behind you, by survival. A falcon rests quietly on one noble's gloved arm. It was about work. The repetition, whether in a blood-washed apron or a velvet robe, two whispered curses, and the quiet fears of those who wondered if their work left something dark behind. The scent of salt and iron has long faded, already laden with platters. A roasted peacock hits, feathers carefully reattached after cooking glimmers, like some mythical bird. And finally, imagine yourself entering the great hall of a baron's manor, perhaps in late autumn. You are always welcome here in the gentle spaces between past and present, where even the hardest stories soften and slow. The table stretches long. You are seated not at the head, of course, but far down, near the lesser guests. A musician plucks at a harp nearby. The lords laugh. This was how the nobility consumed meat, not with haste or labor, but as ritual. The stones, the smoke, the cold flagstones beneath your feet, they're all fading now. There is nothing to do here anymore. The gates are closed, the fires banked as ceremony. Venison, for example, was prized not just for taste, but because only nobles could legally hunt deer. The forests were royal domains, jealously guarded. Wild boar, too, held meaning. Its capture required bravery. It was fierce, sometimes deadly. Then there were birds, herons, swans, even songbirds like larks. The more exotic, the better. And of course, there was beef, rare in peasant diets, but present in noble ones, especially in the form of salted and aged cuts brought in from distant estates. Feasts were choreographed events, often tied to politics, celebrations, or religious observances, and behind the spectacle, the labor remained unseen. In the castle kitchens, where the air was hot and frantic, dozens of cooks, carvers, and turnspit boys worked endlessly. You see, the nobility had the luxury of abstraction, and yet, in a strange way, even this feast connected back to the slaughterhouse. In this contrast, the medieval world reveals its structure. The butcher's burden, quiet and grim. The noble's feast, loud and radiant, one hidden, one paraded, but both part of the same endless cycle. As we draw near the end of our journey, let us now leave the table. And now, the last candle flickers low. The hall is quiet. The streets outside the butcher's quarter are still. From the echoing chambers of slaughterhouses where iron clanged and brine stung the skin, to the narrow alleys of guild power in Paris, all of it threads in the fabric of a world that has long passed and yet, in some ways, still lives beneath our skin. Perhaps what's most striking is not the hardship or the grandeur, but the rhythm. Tonight's story may have wandered through grim places, but it was never really about violence. So now, dear listener, let that dance fade, let your breath slow, let the walls of that distant town fall away. You are safe. You lie now not on straw or in a noisy loft, but in a warm, quiet room of your own. The world is quiet, and sleep is near. Thank you for wandering through history with me tonight. Good night, and may your dreams be calm, may your sleep be deep, and may you wake far from the slaughterhouse.